Welcome back to another thought-provoking journey on Buddha's Odyssey. In today's video, we explore a powerful and often misunderstood concept: the difference between self-love and selfishness. Before diving in, let's take a moment to reflect. Have you ever wondered why loving yourself is seen as selfish in some cultures, yet encouraged in others? Is it possible that by loving ourselves, we can also become selfless? This question, as simple as it may seem, carries profound implications not only for our spiritual growth but also for how we interact with others. Today, we will unravel this mystery together. But before we go deeper, let me tell you a story that might resonate with you. The story of the two monks and the river. Long ago, in a quiet mountain monastery, lived two monks, an elder and a novice. They were bound by their vows, living lives of simplicity and mindfulness. One day, the two set out on a pilgrimage to a distant temple. Along the way, they journeyed through forests, crossed meadows, and finally reached a rushing river. By the riverbank stood a young woman. Her face was pale with worry as she gazed at the turbulent water. She was dressed in fine clothes, which suggested she was on an important journey, but she couldn't bring herself to cross the river. As the two monks approached, the woman looked at them with pleading eyes. "Please, I must get to the other side, but I can't cross this river alone. Can you help me?" The younger monk hesitated. He remembered a strict monastic code: monks were forbidden from touching women, let alone carrying them. Rules were rules, after all. He cast a glance at the elder monk, expecting him to refuse. But to his shock, the elder monk stepped forward without hesitation. He gently said, "Climb onto my back, and I will carry you across." The younger monk's heart raced. How could he break the rules so easily, he thought, but he held his tongue out of respect. The elder monk waded into the river, his steps steady despite the strong current. The woman clung tightly, her fear evident. The monk reassured her with calm words, and soon, they reached the opposite bank. Once on solid ground, the woman climbed down and bowed deeply. "Thank you, venerable monk. I will forever be grateful for your kindness," she said before continuing on her way. The two monks resumed their journey in silence. The younger monk's mind, however, was anything but silent. Thoughts swirled in his head. How could he? Didn't he know the rules? What kind of monk does that? Hours passed, and the novice could no longer contain his frustration. He blurted out, "Master, why did you carry that woman? We monks are not supposed to touch women. Yet you not only touched her but carried her across the river." The elder monk stopped walking and turned to face him. With a calm and gentle smile, he replied, "I set the woman down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This simple yet profound story reveals two truths. 1. Compassion requires wisdom and action, not rigid adherence to rules. The elder monk acted out of pure compassion. His intention was selfless, and his heart was free from attachment or judgment. Once his task was complete, he let go of the event entirely. 2. Selfishness often hides in the guise of judgment. The novice clung to the incident, not out of compassion but out of his own attachment to rules and expectations. His inability to let go weighed on him, creating unnecessary suffering. This story is a mirror to our own lives. How often do we, like the novice, carry the burdens of judgment, resentment, or fear long after the moment has passed? And how can we learn to act with the clarity and compassion of the elder monk? Number 1. Selfishness, the hungry mind. Let's begin by exploring the nature of selfishness, a trait deeply rooted in the dissatisfaction of the human mind. The Buddha described selfishness as a form of craving, a ceaseless hunger that stems from our inability to feel content with what we have. It is the endless yearning for more, a futile attempt to fill an emotional void that often manifests as placing unrealistic expectations on ourselves and those around us. These expectations are born not out of love or understanding but from an internal sense of lack, a desperate belief that external circumstances or other people can somehow complete us. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever tried to control a situation, believing that if things went exactly as you planned, you would finally feel at peace? Or have you placed high expectations on a friend or family member, assuming that their actions would validate your feelings or desires? More often than not, these attempts backfire. The peace we crave eludes us, leaving behind only frustration, resentment, and a sense of disconnection. This is the trap of selfishness. It blinds us to the reality of the present moment and the needs of others because we are consumed by the narrative of what we lack. Selfishness is not inherently malicious, though it can easily lead to harm. At its core, it stems from fear of not having enough, of not being enough, of being left behind. This fear narrows our perspective, making us see the world in terms of scarcity. It convinces us that in order to be happy, we must take, control, or possess, often at the expense of others. This is why selfishness is frequently accompanied by emotions such as jealousy, anger, and entitlement. When we focus solely on our own desires, we become disconnected from the shared human experience, forgetting that true happiness cannot be achieved in isolation. Consider this. Imagine a person in a crowded elevator who refuses to share space, standing rigidly in the middle, leaving no room for others to enter. This act of selfishness might seem minor, but it reflects a deeper mindset, one that prioritizes personal comfort over collective well-being. Over time, this mindset, when left unchecked, can infiltrate larger aspects of life, from relationships to career decisions, causing harm not only to others but also to the individual harboring it. When we place ourselves at the center of every situation, believing that our happiness must come first at all costs, we inadvertently build walls around ourselves, cutting off the flow of love, trust, and collaboration. The Buddha taught that selfishness is one of the primary causes of suffering. Why? Because it is rooted in craving, a desire so insatiable that it cannot be satisfied, no matter how much we achieve or accumulate. Craving is like pouring water into a bottomless vessel. No matter how much you pour, it will never be full. This endless pursuit of satisfaction leaves us exhausted, perpetually chasing after something that always seems just out of reach. Instead of finding peace, we find ourselves trapped in a cycle of wanting, taking, and ultimately losing. One of the greatest dangers of selfishness is its ability to disguise itself as something virtuous. Have you ever heard someone justify their selfish actions with phrases like "I deserve this" or "I'm just looking out for myself"? While self-care and personal boundaries are important, they are not the same as selfishness. Selfishness is about taking more than what is needed, often at the expense of others, whereas true self-care is about restoring balance and ensuring that you can contribute meaningfully to the world around you. It is crucial to distinguish between the two because selfishness can masquerade as empowerment, tricking us into believing that it is a path to happiness when, in fact, it isolates us further. To better understand selfishness, we must also acknowledge how it impacts our relationships. When we act selfishly, we prioritize our needs above the feelings, opinions, and well-being of others. This creates a ripple effect of negativity, damaging trust and mutual respect. For example, a selfish partner in a relationship might demand constant attention while giving little in return, leading to resentment and imbalance. Similarly, a selfish coworker who hoards credit for a team project may temporarily gain recognition but loses the goodwill and cooperation of their colleagues in the long run. These patterns not only harm others but also rob the selfish individual of the deeper connections and support systems that are vital for lasting happiness. The antidote to selfishness lies in shifting our mindset from scarcity to abundance. When we recognize that the world is not a zero-sum game, we begin to see that our happiness does not need to come at the expense of someone else's. By embracing gratitude, we can appreciate what we already have rather than fixating on what we lack. Gratitude allows us to step out of the cycle of craving and into a state of contentment, breaking free from the chains of selfishness. In essence, selfishness is a symptom of an untrained, restless mind. It thrives in an environment of fear and dissatisfaction, convincing us that we must cling tightly to what we have and take more to feel secure. However, as we will explore in the next section, there is another path, a path that leads not to isolation and craving but to freedom, compassion, and fulfillment. This is the path of self-love. Number 2, self-love, the path to freedom and healing. Self-love stands in stark contrast to selfishness. While selfishness is rooted in dissatisfaction and an insatiable craving for external validation or possessions, self-love arises from acceptance, compassion, and understanding. It does not depend on external factors or the approval of others. Instead, it begins with a willingness to look inward. This inward gaze is not critical or harsh, but rather gentle and nurturing. Self-love is about embracing the entirety of who we are, our flaws, imperfections, strengths, and capabilities without judgment or comparison. It is the acknowledgement that we are inherently worthy, regardless of external circumstances. Consider the story of a young woman who constantly compares herself to others. She looks at social media and sees people living seemingly perfect lives, which leaves her feeling inadequate. She believes she must work harder, look better, and achieve more to feel worthy of love and acceptance. Her inner dialogue is filled with self-criticism, and she becomes trapped in a cycle of striving without ever feeling satisfied. One day, a friend introduces her to the idea of gratitude practice. At first, she resists, skeptical that such a simple act could change anything. But she decides to give it a try. Every morning, she writes down 3 things she appreciates about herself. Over time, this small act shifts her perspective. She begins to notice her own qualities, the way she always makes her friends laugh, her determination to overcome challenges, and her creativity. Gradually, she becomes kinder to herself, and this kindness spills over into her interactions with others. She no longer feels the need to compete or compare because she has cultivated a sense of inner peace. This story highlights the transformative power of self-love. Unlike selfishness, which isolates and narrows our focus, self-love expands our perspective and strengthens our connections. When we nurture our inner world, we build a foundation of stability and resilience that allows us to show up fully for others. Self-love is not indulgence or selfishness disguised. It is a path to healing and freedom. It is about creating a space within ourselves where we can rest, grow, and thrive. One of the most profound aspects of self-love is its ability to foster compassion. When we accept ourselves, flaws and all, we become more understanding and forgiving of others. Think about how difficult it is to be patient with someone else when you are constantly berating yourself. The inner critic that judges you harshly is often the same voice that judges others. By quieting that voice through self-love, you cultivate empathy and a greater capacity to connect with those around you. For example, a person who practices self-love is more likely to listen with an open mind during a disagreement, rather than reacting defensively or projecting their insecurities onto the other person. Self-love also promotes a sense of gratitude and contentment. When you love yourself, you shift your focus from what you lack to what you have. This shift creates a mindset of abundance, which is the antidote to the scarcity mindset that fuels selfishness. Gratitude, as simple as it may seem, is a powerful tool for transforming your outlook on life. When you take time to appreciate the small joys in your life, a kind word from a friend, a moment of quiet in nature, or your own growth, it becomes easier to feel at peace with yourself and the world. Another crucial aspect of self-love is setting healthy boundaries. Many people equate self-love with saying yes to everything or putting others' needs above their own. But true self-love involves recognizing your limits and honoring them. Boundaries are not walls, they are guidelines that protect your energy and ensure you can give your best self to the people and projects that matter most. For instance, someone who practices self-love might decline an invitation to a social event when they need rest, knowing that taking care of themselves in that moment allows them to be more present and engaged in the future. Self-love is also deeply tied to the practice of mindfulness. To love yourself fully, you must be present with yourself. This means observing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without judgment. Mindfulness allows you to notice patterns of self-sabotage or negative self-talk and gently redirect them toward more compassionate perspectives. For example, instead of thinking, "I failed at this project because I'm not good enough," a mindful approach might be, "I didn't achieve the result I wanted this time, but I can learn from this experience and try again." This shift from self-criticism to self-compassion is the essence of self-love. The Buddha's teachings offer profound insights into the importance of self-love. He taught that if we truly love ourselves, we will guard our minds against harmful thoughts. This is because our thoughts shape our reality. Negative thoughts such as jealousy, resentment, and self-doubt can cloud our judgment and prevent us from seeing the beauty within ourselves and others. By practicing self-love, we protect our minds from these unwholesome states and create space for positivity and growth. One of the most powerful outcomes of self-love is its ripple effect. When you love and care for yourself, you inspire others to do the same. Your energy becomes a source of light for those around you. Imagine a parent who models self-love for their children. By taking time for self-care, expressing gratitude, and setting healthy boundaries, they teach their children valuable lessons about self-worth and emotional resilience. Similarly, in relationships, self-love fosters healthier dynamics because it eliminates the need for codependency. Instead of relying on others to fill emotional voids, you bring a sense of wholeness to the relationship, allowing for deeper connection and mutual respect. In essence, self-love is not a destination but a lifelong journey. It requires consistent practice and patience, especially in a world that often equates self-worth with external achievements. However, the rewards of this practice are immense. Self-love liberates you from the need for external validation, empowers you to face challenges with confidence, and enables you to live a life of greater authenticity and joy. As we reflect on the nature of self-love, it becomes clear that it is not only a personal practice but also a gift to the world. By nurturing ourselves, we become more compassionate, resilient, and connected to others. Self-love is the foundation upon which we can build a life of purpose and fulfillment, and it is the key to transforming not just our own lives but the lives of those around us. Number 3. The Buddha's teachings on self-love. The Buddha's teachings on self-love are profound and timeless, offering a foundation for cultivating inner peace and emotional resilience. One of his most striking statements on the subject is, "If you truly love yourself, you will guard your mind against harmful thoughts." On the surface, this may seem simple, but its implications run deep. To truly understand this teaching, we must explore what it means to protect the mind and why it is essential for self-love. Guarding the mind begins with awareness. Harmful thoughts such as jealousy, anger, resentment, and self-doubt can act like thieves, robbing us of our peace and clarity. These thoughts often arise without invitation, triggered by external circumstances or deeply ingrained patterns of thinking. For example, jealousy may emerge when we see someone achieving something we desire, anger may flare up when we feel wronged, and resentment can build when we dwell on past grievances. Left unchecked, these emotions can cloud our judgment and create a toxic internal environment. Over time, They harm not only our relationships with others but also our relationship with ourselves. When the Buddha spoke of guarding the mind, he emphasized the importance of recognizing these harmful thoughts as they arise and not allowing them to take root. This doesn't mean suppressing or ignoring negative emotions, rather, it involves acknowledging them with mindfulness and then choosing not to feed them. For instance, when feelings of anger arise, a mindful response might be to take a deep breath, observe the sensation without judgment, and reflect on the impermanence of the emotion. By doing so, you prevent the anger from escalating into harmful words or actions that you might later regret. Jealousy is another common emotion that can undermine self-love. When we compare ourselves to others, we often focus on their strengths and our perceived weaknesses, which creates a sense of lack. This comparison not only diminishes our self-worth but also fosters resentment toward those we envy. The Buddha's teaching encourages us to shift our focus inward, appreciating our unique qualities and the blessings in our own lives. This practice of gratitude is a powerful antidote to jealousy. When you cultivate gratitude, you train your mind to see abundance rather than scarcity, which strengthens your sense of self-worth and reduces the need for comparison. Resentment, too, is a heavy burden that can weigh down the mind. Holding on to past grievances can create a cycle of negativity that prevents us from moving forward. The Buddha likened resentment to carrying a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. It burns you more than the person you're angry at. Letting go of resentment is an act of self-love because it frees you from the chains of the past and allows you to embrace the present moment with an open heart. One of the most profound ways to guard the mind against harmful thoughts is through the practice of loving-kindness meditation, or metta-bhavana. In this practice, you cultivate feelings of love and goodwill toward yourself and others. It begins with directing kind and compassionate thoughts toward yourself, repeating phrases such as, "May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be free from suffering." Once you've established a sense of self-compassion, you extend these thoughts to loved ones, acquaintances, and even those with whom you have conflict. This practice not only reduces negative emotions but also deepens your capacity for empathy and connection. The Buddha also taught that guarding the mind requires understanding the nature of thoughts and emotions. He emphasized that thoughts are impermanent, they arise, linger for a time, and then fade away. By observing this transience, we can develop a sense of detachment, recognizing that we are not defined by our thoughts or emotions. This detachment doesn't mean apathy but rather a healthy separation that allows us to respond to challenges with clarity and wisdom. For example, instead of identifying with a fleeting feeling of sadness by saying, "I am sad," you might say, "Sadness is present." This subtle shift in language creates space between you and the emotion, making it easier to process and release. Another key aspect of the Buddha's teachings on self-love is the importance of replacing harmful thoughts with wholesome ones. When jealousy arises, counter it with appreciation for the success of others. When anger flares, practice patience and compassion. When self-doubt creeps in, remind yourself of your inherent worth and the progress you've made. This process, often referred to as mental cultivation, is like tending a garden. By uprooting the weeds of negativity and planting seeds of positivity, you create a mental landscape that fosters growth, peace, and joy. The Buddha's teachings also highlight the interconnectedness of self-love and love for others. When you guard your mind and cultivate positive states, you not only improve your own well-being but also enhance your relationships. A person who loves themselves is more patient, understanding, and generous because they are not weighed down by inner turmoil. For example, someone who has let go of resentment is less likely to hold grudges and more likely to forgive, creating harmony in their interactions. Similarly, a person who practices self-compassion is better equipped to extend compassion to others, fostering deeper and more meaningful connections. It's important to note that guarding the mind is not a one-time effort but an ongoing practice. Life is full of challenges and triggers that can stir up harmful thoughts, but with consistent mindfulness and intention, you can navigate these difficulties with greater ease. Just as a gardener must regularly tend to their plants, removing weeds, and providing nourishment, so too must we tend to our minds. This requires patience, self-awareness, and a commitment to growth. Ultimately, the Buddha's teachings on self-love remind us that we have the power to shape our inner world. By guarding our minds against harmful thoughts, we create the conditions for peace, gratitude, and joy to flourish. This inner transformation not only enriches our own lives but also radiates outward, positively impacting those around us. Self-love, in this context, is not a selfish act but a profound gift to ourselves and to the world. Number 4. A fine line: self-love versus selfishness. The distinction between self-love and selfishness can be subtle but profoundly significant, and it ultimately lies in intention. To understand this difference fully, we need to delve into the motivations behind each mindset and how they manifest in our actions and relationships. While self-love is rooted in compassion and seeks to uplift and heal both ourselves and others, selfishness is driven by craving a relentless desire to take and control, often at the expense of others. At its core, self-love is a nurturing practice that stems from a deep sense of understanding and acceptance. It is not about elevating oneself above others but rather about fostering inner peace and resilience so that we can contribute meaningfully to the world around us. Self-love recognizes the interconnectedness of all beings and strives to cultivate harmony, both internally and externally. For example, when we take time for self-care, whether through mindfulness practices, physical rest, or emotional reflection, it is not an act of isolation but an act of preparation. By caring for ourselves, we build the capacity to show up for others in a more compassionate and authentic way. Selfishness, on the other hand, is rooted in the illusion of separateness. It arises from a belief that our happiness is independent of others, or worse, that it must come at the expense of their well-being. This mindset is often fueled by fear of scarcity, inadequacy, or rejection. Selfishness narrows our perspective, making us focused solely on our own needs and desires while disregarding the impact of our actions on those around us. For instance, a selfish individual might hoard resources or seek constant validation without considering how their behavior affects others. Over time, this approach creates disconnection and alienation, as it erodes trust and mutual respect in relationships. To illustrate the contrast between self-love and selfishness, let us revisit the story of the two monks. The elder monk embodied self-love through his compassionate and selfless actions. By helping the woman cross the river, he acted from a place of pure intention, free from attachment or expectation. His actions were motivated by kindness and understanding, not by a desire for personal gain or recognition. He was able to let go of the situation as soon as it was resolved, demonstrating the freedom and lightness that comes with self-love. The novice monk, in contrast, was trapped by selfishness, though it may not have appeared that way at first glance. His reluctance to help the woman stemmed from his attachment to rules and his fear of breaking them, even when doing so would have been an act of compassion. His subsequent judgment of the elder monk revealed an inability to let go of his own ego. Instead of focusing on the woman's needs or the elder monk's intentions, he fixated on his own sense of righteousness. This self-centered perspective caused him unnecessary distress and highlighted the isolating nature of selfishness. The difference between these two approaches becomes even clearer when we examine their outcomes. The elder monk's actions not only helped the woman but also left him at peace with himself and the situation. His self-love allowed him to act in alignment with his values and move forward without regret. The novice monk, however, was burdened by his judgment and internal conflict, which prevented him from experiencing the same sense of peace. This distinction underscores an important truth. Self-love and selfishness may sometimes look similar on the surface, but their underlying intentions and impacts are vastly different. Self-love is inherently expansive. It creates a ripple effect of positivity and connection. When we practice self-love, we not only enhance our own well-being but also inspire and uplift those around us. Selfishness, on the other hand, is inherently restrictive. It isolates us from others and perpetuates a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. One of the challenges in distinguishing between self-love and selfishness is that society often conflates the two. Acts of self-care, for example, are sometimes labeled as selfish by those who misunderstand their purpose. Setting boundaries, prioritizing mental health, or saying no to commitments that drain us are all acts of self-love, yet they are sometimes perceived as self-serving or inconsiderate. This misconception can lead people to neglect their own needs out of fear of being judged, which only reinforces the cycle of burnout and resentment. To avoid this trap, it is essential to examine our intentions. Are we acting out of a genuine desire to care for ourselves and others, or are we motivated by fear, entitlement, or a need for control? For instance, taking a day off work to rest and recharge is an act of self-love if it enables you to return with renewed energy and focus. However, shirking responsibilities while expecting others to pick up the slack is selfish, as it disregards the needs and efforts of those around you. By reflecting on our motivations, we can ensure that our actions align with the principles of self-love rather than slipping into selfishness. Another way to distinguish self-love from selfishness is to consider the long-term impact of our actions. Self-love tends to create sustainable benefits for both ourselves and others. For example, a parent who practices self-love by prioritizing their mental health is better equipped to provide emotional support and stability for their children. In contrast, selfishness often leads to short-term gratification at the expense of long-term well-being. A parent who prioritizes their desires over their children's needs may enjoy temporary freedom but risks damaging the parent-child relationship in the process. The Buddha's teachings emphasize the importance of intention in all our actions. He taught that actions rooted in compassion and wisdom lead to liberation, while those driven by craving and ignorance perpetuate suffering. This principle applies equally to the distinction between self-love and selfishness. When we act from a place of self-love, we align ourselves with a path of compassion and wisdom, creating the conditions for lasting peace and happiness. When we act from selfishness, we reinforce the patterns of craving and attachment that keep us trapped in cycles of dissatisfaction. In essence, self-love is not about prioritizing oneself over others but about recognizing that our well-being is interconnected with the well-being of those around us. By caring for ourselves, we cultivate the inner strength and clarity needed to care for others. Selfishness, in contrast, arises from a false sense of separation and leads to actions that harm both ourselves and others. The key to navigating this fine line lies in cultivating self-awareness, examining our intentions, and choosing actions that align with the values of compassion and interconnectedness. By understanding the difference between self-love and selfishness, we can approach our lives with greater clarity and purpose. We can learn to care for ourselves without guilt, set boundaries without fear, and act with compassion without hesitation. In doing so, we create a foundation for deeper connections, richer experiences, and a more fulfilling life. Self-love is not just a gift to ourselves, it is a gift to the world, a reminder that true happiness is found not in taking but in giving and growing together. Number 5, Lessons and Practical Takeaways. Practicing the lessons of self-love and understanding its differences from selfishness can transform the way we interact with ourselves and the world around us. The teachings of the Buddha provide practical and profound guidance for this journey, and implementing these principles into daily life begins with small but impactful steps. Let's break down these lessons and explore how to apply them. The first practice, gratitude, serves as the foundation for shifting our mindset from scarcity to abundance. Gratitude is a powerful tool that rewires our focus from what we lack to what we already have. In a world that constantly encourages us to chase more success, more possessions, more validation, it's easy to overlook the simple blessings in our lives. Practicing gratitude allows us to step off this treadmill of craving and pause to appreciate the present moment. For example, you might start each day by writing down 3 things you're thankful for. These don't need to be grand achievements. They can be as simple as the warmth of the sun, a kind word from a friend, or the fact that you woke up to another day of possibilities. Over time, this practice trains your mind to notice and savor the positive aspects of life, creating a sense of contentment and reducing the constant urge to compare yourself to others. Gratitude also has a ripple effect. When you cultivate a grateful mindset, it not only enhances your own well-being but also positively influences your relationships. Expressing gratitude to others, whether through a heartfelt thank you, a thoughtful gesture, or simply acknowledging their efforts, deepens connections and fosters mutual respect. For instance, taking a moment to thank a coworker for their help on a project can strengthen your professional bond and create an environment of collaboration and appreciation. In this way, gratitude bridges the gap between self-love and selflessness, reminding us that we are all interconnected. The second lesson, guarding your mind, emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and emotional regulation. Our minds are constantly bombarded with thoughts, many of which can be harmful if left unchecked. Jealousy, anger, resentment, and self-doubt are some of the most common culprits that cloud our judgment and disrupt our peace. These emotions often arise as automatic responses to external triggers, but the Buddha taught that we are not powerless in the face of these mental states. By practicing mindfulness, we can observe these thoughts as they arise, recognize their impermanence, and choose how to respond to them. Guarding your mind does not mean suppressing or ignoring negative emotions. Instead, it involves creating space between the stimulus and your reaction, allowing you to respond with patience and understanding rather than impulsivity. For example, imagine feeling a pang of jealousy when a friend achieves something you've been striving for. Instead of letting the jealousy fester, you could pause, take a deep breath, and remind yourself that their success does not diminish your own potential. You might even take it a step further by celebrating their achievement, which transforms a negative emotion into a positive one and strengthens your relationship with that person. Replacing harmful thoughts with constructive ones is another key aspect of guarding your mind. When anger arises, you can counter it with compassion by trying to understand the other person's perspective. When self-doubt creeps in, you can challenge it with affirmations of your strengths and past achievements. This process requires consistent practice, but over time, it builds mental resilience and creates a more peaceful inner world. The Buddha likened this practice to tending a garden. By removing weeds, negative thoughts, and nurturing the soil, positive intentions, you create a flourishing mental landscape that supports growth and harmony. The third lesson, acting with intention, serves as a compass for navigating the complexities of life. Every action we take has a motivation behind it, and understanding that motivation is crucial for aligning our behavior with our values. Before making a decision, ask yourself, is this action coming from love or from craving? This simple question can reveal whether your actions are rooted in self-love or selfishness. For instance, consider the act of setting boundaries in a relationship. If you decline a social invitation because you genuinely need rest and time to recharge, the decision is likely coming from a place of self-love. You're prioritizing your well-being so that you can show up more fully for yourself and others. On the other hand, if you refuse the invitation out of spite or a desire to punish the person who invited you, the decision may be rooted in craving a need to assert control or feed your ego. By reflecting on your intentions, you can ensure that your actions contribute to your well-being without harming others. Acting with intention also requires us to take responsibility for our choices. It's easy to fall into the trap of blaming external circumstances or other people for our actions, but true self-love involves owning our decisions and their consequences. This doesn't mean being overly critical of yourself when you make a mistake. Rather, it means acknowledging the role you played and learning from the experience. For example, if you find yourself procrastinating on an important task, instead of berating yourself or blaming distractions, you might reflect on why you avoided the task in the first place. Was it fear of failure? Perfectionism? Once you identify the root cause, you can address it with compassion and take steps to move forward. These three practices, gratitude, guarding your mind, and acting with intention, are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Gratitude cultivates a sense of abundance, which makes it easier to guard your mind against feelings of jealousy or resentment. A guarded mind, in turn, supports intentional actions that align with your values and contribute to your well-being. Together, they create a foundation for self-love that is both practical and transformative. It's important to remember that these practices are not quick fixes but lifelong commitments. Self-love is a journey, not a destination, and it requires patience, persistence, and self-compassion. There will be days when you struggle to feel grateful, when negative thoughts overwhelm you, or when your actions don't align with your intentions. On those days, it's crucial to remind yourself that growth is not linear and that every small step you take contributes to your overall progress. To incorporate these practices into your daily life, consider creating rituals that anchor you in the present moment. For example, you might start each morning with a gratitude journal, listing 3 things you're thankful for before you begin your day. Throughout the day, you could practice mindfulness by pausing periodically to check in with your thoughts and emotions. At the end of the day, you might reflect on your actions, asking yourself whether they were motivated by love or craving and how you might approach similar situations differently in the future. These small, consistent efforts can lead to profound changes over time. Ultimately, the lessons of gratitude, mindfulness, and intentionality remind us that self-love is not about perfection but about progress. It's about showing up for yourself each day, even when it's difficult, and making choices that honor your well-being and the well-being of others. By practicing these principles, you not only transform your own life but also contribute to a more compassionate and connected world. Self-love, as the Buddha taught, is not a selfish act but a foundation for living with wisdom, kindness, and purpose. As we come to the end of today's journey on Buddha's Odyssey, let's pause to reflect on this vital truth. True self-love is not selfish, it is the foundation of compassion, generosity, and connection. It allows us to navigate life's challenges with grace and to let go of the burdens we no longer need to carry, just as the elder monk showed us in his timeless act of selflessness. Now, I leave you with a simple but powerful challenge. Take 5 minutes today to reflect on what you genuinely love and appreciate about yourself. Whether it's your resilience, your kindness, or your ability to grow, let this moment of self-reflection open the door to greater peace within. You may be surprised at how this one small practice transforms the way you see not only yourself but also the world around you. If this story touched your heart, if these teachings sparked a new perspective, I invite you to join this community of seekers by liking, commenting, and subscribing to Buddha's Odyssey. Let's continue to explore the Buddha's profound wisdom together, one journey at a time. Until we meet again, stay mindful, stay compassionate, and stay curious.